Good morning, Detective.
Good morning.
Are you employed?
I am.
Where are you employed?
I am employed by the Darrow County.
Uh, what do you do for Darrow County?
I am a detective.
How long have you been detective?
For about 2 years now.
How long have you been employed with Darrow County?
Oh, more than a decade, maybe 11 years.
What did you do before you were detective?
Well, I was on patrol. Well, for 2 years I was in the custody division, and then 5 years I was on patrol, and then a year I spent in internal affairs, and then finally I became detective, which I am now. Going on 3 years now.
Okay. What sort of work do you do as detective?
As a detective, I investigate crime scenes, and I write up reports. This is my observations. I have the power to arrest. I take custody of evidence. I mark it.
What sort of cases do you get called on?
All sorts of violent cases, homicides and rapes, or burglaries and assaults, all sorts of nasty stuff.
Okay, I'd like to direct your attention to September 7th, 2005. Do you recall if you were working?
I was, yes.
And when did you start working that day?
I was doing the morning shift. So the morning shift starts around 8 o'clock, and I was catching up on some paperwork until I got the phone call from the dispatcher.
What was that? What was the substance of that call?
It was telling me to go to a scene of a homicide.
What did you do next?
Well, I went to the scene of the homicide, and turned out that it was Ashgate Farms.
How long did it take you to get there?
Not too far. Probably it's not too far. So probably maybe 12 minutes or so.
Do you recall what time you arrived?
I would say roughly around 9:15.
And what did you do when you first arrived?
Well, when I first arrived, I saw that the deputy, as well as the defendant, and another guy was in the front porch, and I approached them, spoke to the deputy, and I saw that the woman had cuts on her arm.
Which woman was that?
I came to know her as the defendant, Sarah Baker.
Can you identify Sarah Baker in this courtroom?
I can.
Can you point her out and identify a piece of clothing she's wearing?
Yes, she is sitting over there in the defense table, and she's wearing blue shirt with white collar.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that Detective Holmes has identified the defendant. Now, when you arrive at a crime scene, what sort of procedures do you follow?
Well, when I arrive at the crime scene, I want to make sure that the crime scene is secure. But the deputy had secured it, but the deputy hasn't taken taken custody of any evidence. So I proceeded into the crime scene. I observed around. I wanted to get a 360 view of the whole crime scene. Then what I usually do is I take any weapons, because those are very dangerous. You don't want them lying around. In this case, I took possession of shell casings and a gun, as well as a knife that the defendant was holding. I'm sorry, the victim.
You said that the deputy who had secured the scene didn't take possession. Why is that? Of the evidence. I'm sorry. Why didn't he take possession of the evidence?
It's not something that he would do. Usually whoever is the first officer to arrive just make sure that no one's in the crime scene, tapes it off, not necessarily with real tape, but tapes it off and make sure no one tampers with any of the evidence, make sure the evidence is still where it was when they first arrived, and then they would have to wait for the detective. That's just our protocol.
And when you arrive, is that how? We'll scratch that. You mentioned that Deputy Camelli was there with a man and a woman, and you identified the defendant. Who was the other person that the deputy was with?
I came to know him as Chris Spain. He, I guess, is an employee of Ashgate Farms.
Did you speak with him?
I did briefly, and then later on, following day, later on that day, I spoke with him more extensively.
Do you recall the substance of your conversation of that morning?
That the defendant, Sarah Baker, had called him kind of hysterical, that he came and told her to call 911, and that's when they did.
And so after you spoke with Mr. Spahn and the deputy, what did you do next?
At that point, I contacted Carl, the dispatcher, to relay the 911 call to me. And based on that, on the phone call as well as my observations of the crime scene, I placed Sarah Baker under arrest.
What were your observations of the crime scene?
That he had, well, I mean, just from looking at it, that he was just laying on the floor, face down, in a pool of his own blood, or a pool of blood, and his right hand was underneath him, and he had a knife in the hand.
Who is the he that you're mentioning?
Kelly Baker.
Okay. You said that he had a knife in his right hand.
Yeah.
But you also said that he was face down.
Yep, he was.
How did you know that he had a knife in his right hand?
I mean, I could see it. It wasn't concealed. You know, it was showing from how he was lying. It's not a pocket knife.
What did you do with the knife?
I took custody of the knife.
What is general procedure for taking custody of evidence?
What you would have to do is obviously wear gloves. Everybody has to wear gloves, so that no cross-contamination of DNA, no fingerprints, anything like that. So I put on my gloves. I moved toward the body and made sure that I wasn't stepping in any of the blood. Then I reached into where the knife was and took the knife out without touching the body.
What did you do next?
I took the knife, put it into an evidence bag, I labeled it, and I sealed it, I labeled it, put it into my bag of evidence to be classified later at the station house.
Your Honor, I'm marking prosecution or People's Exhibit 1 for identification. Let the record reflect that I'm showing defense counsel. May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Detective, do you recognize this photo?
I did.
What do you recognize it to be?
It was the knife that Kelly Baker had in his hand.
How do you recognize it?
I saw the knife when it was in his hand.
Is this photograph a fair and accurate representation of the knife?
Yes.
Are there any... Scratch that. Okay. Your Honor, I'd like to move what's been marked as People's 1 for identification into evidence as People's Exhibit 1. Now, what was the condition of the knife when you recovered it?
It was covered in blood. The handle was covered in blood.
And what sort of you mentioned the collection of the evidence.
Yes.
Was there any additional work done before the evidence was bagged and put in your car?
I made sure to measure it, and I did.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that you found cartridges in the scene. Is that correct?
Yep, shell casings.
Where were those located?
They were by the refrigerator towards the entrance of the kitchen.
Was there anything else?
And the gun, of course.
I'd like to mark Peoples 1 for identification. Let the record reflect I'm showing defense counsel. Excuse me, Peoples 2. May I approach the witness again? Detective, do you recognize what's been marked as Peoples 2?
I do.
How do you recognize it?
It is a photograph of the evidence I collected.
What is it a photograph of?
Photograph of a gun.
And you collected this?
I did. I took custody of the weapon.
Okay. Is this a fair and accurate representation of the gun when you collected it?
Yes, it is.
Like to move what's been marked as Peoples 2 into evidence as Peoples Exhibit 2.